Let's take a look at the publish profile that we created in the previous clip to deploy the web app to Azure. Under the Properties folder, in the Publish Profiles folder, there was an XML file created. There are a couple of key nodes I want to highlight here. The web publish method is msdeploy. That's the default. The target information about the app service is here, like the resource ID in Azure and the resource group. The site URL to launch after publishing, the username to authenticate with, and the save password node is set to true. Okay, so it looks like the publish profile is authenticating with the name of the app service, not with the name of the administrator account that we use to connect to Azure and set up the publish profile. That's because we don't actually publish to Azure App Service with an Azure AD user account. We only use that to connect in the Publish wizard and pull down the information used to publish, including the credentials needed to publish to the app service. Let's go back to Solution Explorer and click this button to show all files. Now there's a hidden file showing, and let's open this file. So there's a node that says encrypted password. This is being used along with the username in the other XML file to authenticate to Azure for deployment. This is base64 encoded, so it's possible to decrypt this using classes in system.security.cryptography. But let's see where this password came from. Let's go back to the Azure portal, and I'm still in the app service we just deployed to. I'll go to the Deployment Center tab, and let's go to the FTPS credentials. This has the URL to the FTPS endpoint, but it also has two types of credentials. There are application scope credentials, which only apply to this app service, and there's a place here for a user to create user-scoped credentials, which can be used with all the apps to which the user has access. The application scoped credentials are created by default, and you can't change the password, but you can copy it and reset it. Let's copy this and open up Notepad so we can see the password. The username here is the name of the app service with a $sign in front, which is what we saw in the XML in the publish profile. So from Visual Studio, the administrator account was able to connect to Azure and pull down this information in order to create the publish profile and encrypt this password locally to use it for deployment. This might seem like an extra step, but what it really enables is that you can provide these credentials to any user to use them for deployment. And notice that the application scoped credentials are specific to a deployment slot. In this case, the production deployment slot. So you can provide limited access to just a development slot, for example. Rather than copy these credentials, there's an easier way. From the Overview tab, you can click this button. That downloads a text file. Let's open up File Explorer and navigate to the Downloads folder. There's the file. I'll open it with Visual Studio so we can format the XML and make it a little easier to read. Once it opens, I'll highlight all the XML with Ctrl-A and then format it with Ctrl-K and then Ctrl-F. So there are three publish profile nodes here, one for web deploy, one for FTP, and one for zip deploy. If we scroll over, the web deploy and zip deploy profiles point to the same publish URL, which is the Kudu endpoint for the app service. But the FTP profile points to an FTPS endpoint. Okay, but what's interesting is that they all use the same credentials, the same username and password, the one we saw in the portal. The FTP endpoint formats it with the name of the app service and a backslash, but it's still the same password. The rest of the properties are the same for each. So now how can we use this publish profile? One of the ways we can use it is by importing it into Visual Studio. Let's go back to Visual Studio and back to the publish page. And let's add a new publish profile. This time, instead of connecting to Azure to pull down those credentials, let's assume this user doesn't have those privileges, but you've provided them with the publish profile you downloaded from the portal. If the user clicks on the Import Profile option, they can navigate to the XML file and open it here, and then click Finish. It says another XML publish profile was created. So let's close this, go back to Solution Explorer, and under the Properties tab, there were actually three new profiles created, one for each of the nodes in the publish profile. One for FTP, one for zip deploy, and one for web deploy, which has the same name as the previous one, but with a 1 at the end. Let's open that up. if we compare it to the one created in the previous clip, the one we created by connecting to Azure first, they're pretty much the same. Most notably, the username is the same, and there was an accompanying file created with the encrypted password. Now let's update the home page to show that there was a new code deployment. And save these changes. Before we publish these changes, let's actually see which account we're running under as far as Azure is concerned. If you go into the Tools menu, Options, and expand Azure Service Authentication, this is where you can manage the accounts that can connect to Azure. So it's defaulted to my Outlook.com account, but the other accounts are listed here, and you can add an account from this dropdown also. Let's select the user account that wasn't able to see any resources in Azure because it didn't have the contributor permissions to the app service. That way we know for sure that we're connecting to Azure using the published profile information, not using an Azure AD user identity. Now let's publish these changes. The code will compile and be copied to the app service. And when that's completed, a browser opens with the changes showing on the home page. Now let's see how to deploy a zip file to app service. First, let's update the home page again. We need to create the zip file, which is a compiled version of the app, the same files that got pushed by Visual Studio. So we're not just copying all the source code. You create the zip file from the Publish menu again by right-clicking on the project name. That brings up the Publish page, since we already have some profiles created. So let's click New to add another profile. And this time we're going to choose Folder, which will publish the application to a local folder or a file share. And let's choose a folder. I'll navigate to my desktop and choose this folder I've already created called Deployment Files. Click Finish, and it says a published profile was created. Let's close this and look under the Properties folder. There's the published profile called folderprofile.pubxml. There's also another file, and this is the file that typically holds the deployment credentials. But in this case, the XML is empty, and that's because we can't actually deploy from this folder. This is just a place to stage our files for deployment in some other way. Let's close this and go to File Explorer and navigate to the Deployment Files folder on the desktop. It's empty, and that's because we haven't actually published yet. So let's publish this application to the local folder from Visual Studio. The files were just compiled, and this is the set of files that can get deployed to Azure. But in order to use the zip deploy approach, we need to zip these files. So I'll highlight them and send them to a zip folder. You can call this anything you want. At this point, there are several ways you can deploy this zip file. You can do it programmatically using the Azure CLI, PowerShell, or the Kudu REST endpoint. You can also copy it to a storage account and have your app service run it from there. We'll talk about that later. But the simplest way is to deploy it right into the Kudu portal. So let's go back to the app service and browse to the deployed application. Remember in the previous module, you saw that the Kudu portal for this app service can be accessed by inserting SCM between the app service name and azurewebsites.net. And we're brought into the portal. Now we go to the Tools menu and select Zip Push Deploy. This shows all the files that are currently deployed in the www root folder of the app service file share. I'll bring up Windows Explorer, and all we need to do is drag this zip file onto the box where the other files are. That starts the copying and unzipping process, and you can see the progress at the top right of the file viewer. The unzipping is finished, and there's a log at the bottom here. It says a script was generated and run. The app service worker process was recycled, and the deployment was successful. Let's go back to the app service and browse again. Now the home page has been updated to show that our app was successfully deployed. So we've deployed using zip deploy, and we used our Azure Active Directory credentials to authenticate and deploy using the Kudu portal. Next, let's look at another way to deploy the zip file with a feature called Run from Package.